Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into something that might just change how you think about sleep forever. We're heading back to the 13th century, out onto the endless grasslands of the Mongol steppe, where the most feared warriors in human history laid their heads to rest. But here's the thing, these weren't just brutal conquerors rolling out of bed to terrorize half the world. They were people, and like all people, they had to sleep. The question is, how do you get a good night's rest when your bedroom is a felt tent, your neighbors are 10,000 other warriors, and your alarm clock is the sound of enemy arrows whistling overhead? So grab something warm to drink, maybe dim those lights, and let's journey together into the darkness of the Mongol steppe. Because what we're about to discover isn't just about how nomads slept 800 years ago. It's about survival, ritual, and the intimate human moments that happened between the great conquests that shaped our world. Picture this. It's the winter of 1220, somewhere on the vast steppes of Central Asia. The temperature has dropped to 20 below zero, the wind is howling like a living thing, and you're about to spend the night in a felt tent with a dozen other Mongol warriors. There's no hotel, no heated bedroom, no memory foam mattress, just you, the cold, and the endless sky above. Welcome to Bedtime in the Mongol Empire. The Mongols didn't just conquer the largest land empire in human history by accident. They did it because they understood something fundamental about survival that most of us have forgotten. They knew that rest wasn't a luxury, it was a weapon. And like every weapon in their arsenal, they had perfected the art of using it. Let's start with the most basic question. Where exactly do you sleep when your entire civilization is mobile? The answer lies in one of the most ingenious pieces of architecture ever created, the gyr, or as most people know it today, the yurt. These circular felt tents weren't just shelters. They were engineering marvels designed to keep families alive in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. A typical gyr could house anywhere from 5 to 15 people, depending on the family's status and wealth. The walls were made of collapsible wooden lattice, covered in layers of felt that had been compressed and waterproofed with animal fat. The roof was a wooden wheel supported by curved poles, with a central opening that served as both chimney and skylight. And here's the brilliant part. The entire structure could be assembled or disassembled in under an hour. When your lifestyle demands that you might need to pack up and move at a moment's notice, that kind of efficiency isn't just convenient, it's survival. But the real genius wasn't in the construction, it was in the layout. Mongol sleeping arrangements weren't random. They were a carefully orchestrated system that reflected everything from social hierarchy to spiritual beliefs. The gyr was divided into specific zones, each with its own purpose and meaning. The area directly across from the entrance was considered the most sacred, reserved for the family's most precious possessions and honored guests. The right side, as you entered, was typically the women's domain, where cooking, childcare, and textile work took place. The left side belonged to the men, where weapons, saddles, and hunting gear were stored. And sleep. Sleep happened everywhere and nowhere at once. Unlike our modern bedrooms with their fixed beds and private spaces, Mongol families shared sleeping areas that shifted and changed depending on the season, the weather, and who was visiting. During the coldest months, everyone slept close to the central fire, wrapped in layers of sheepskin and felt. Children nestled between their parents, grandparents claimed spots near the warmest walls, and even the family's most valuable animals, the newborn lambs and foals, might share the space during brutal storms. This communal sleeping wasn't just about warmth, though that was certainly part of it. It was about security, social bonding, and the practical reality that in a world where survival depended on the group, even sleep was a collective activity. Privacy, as we understand it, simply didn't exist. But rather than seeing this as a limitation, the Mongols turned it into a strength. Shared sleeping spaces, meant shared vigilance, shared warmth, and shared stories that bound the community together. Now, you might be wondering about comfort. After all, we're talking about people who spent their days on horseback, riding across landscapes that could shift from blazing desert to frozen tundra in a matter of hours. Surely they had some system for making sleep more bearable. They did, and it was surprisingly sophisticated. Mongol bedding was an art form in itself. The foundation was usually a thick felt mat, sometimes reinforced with leather or woven grass. On top of that went layers of sheepskin, with the wool facing inward for warmth and the leather facing outward for protection from moisture. The wealthy might have silk blankets, traded from China or captured in raids, but most families relied on wool, felt, and fur. The key was layering, creating a system that could be adjusted based on temperature and personal preference. But here's where it gets interesting. The Mongols didn't just sleep on their bedding, they slept in it. Rather than lying on top of blankets like we do, they created what was essentially a sleeping cocoon, wrapping themselves in layers of felt and fur that could be adjusted throughout the night. This wasn't just about warmth, it was about creating a personal micro-environment that could be controlled even when the external conditions were completely unpredictable. And the pillows? Forget down or memory foam. Mongol pillows were typically made from leather stuffed with wool, horsehair, or dried grass. They were firm, practical, and designed to last through years of constant travel. Some warriors even used their saddles as pillows, a practice that served the dual purpose of keeping their most valuable equipment close and ensuring they could mount up quickly if needed. The sleeping positions themselves were also carefully considered. Mongols traditionally slept on their sides, often with their knees drawn up toward their chest. This wasn't just about comfort. It was about conserving body heat and protecting vital organs from the cold. Sleeping on your back was considered not just uncomfortable, but potentially dangerous, as it exposed too much of your body to the elements. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Mongol sleep culture was how it adapted to their nomadic lifestyle. These weren't people who went to bed at the same time every night and woke up at the same time every morning. Their sleep schedules were dictated by the rhythms of their animals, the weather, and the demands of travel. During the summer months, when the days were long and the grass was good, they might sleep only 4 or 5 hours a night, taking advantage of the optimal conditions for moving their herds. In winter, when travel was difficult and food was scarce, they might sleep 12 or 14 hours, conserving energy and staying warm. This flexibility extended to their understanding of sleep itself. While we tend to think of sleep as a single, continuous period of unconsciousness, the Mongols practiced what historians call segmented sleep. They would sleep for several hours, wake up for a period of activity, then sleep again. This wasn't insomnia or a sleep disorder. It was a deliberate strategy that allowed them to maintain vigilance, tend to their animals, and respond to changing conditions throughout the night. During these wakeful periods, they might check on their horses, add fuel to the fire, or simply sit quietly and listen to the sounds of the steppe. These weren't wasted hours. They were opportunities for reflection, planning, and the kind of deep thinking that can only happen in the quiet darkness before dawn. The children learned these patterns from birth. Mongol babies slept in wooden cradles that could be easily transported and placed near their mothers during travel. As they grew older, they graduated to sharing sleeping spaces with their siblings and cousins, learning the rhythms of communal rest that would serve them throughout their lives. By the time they reached adolescence, they were fully integrated into the family's sleep patterns, understanding when to rest, when to wake, and how to find comfort in even the most challenging conditions. But sleep in the Mongol Empire wasn't just about individual rest. It was about the collective rhythm of the entire community. The timing of sleep affected everything from military strategy to animal husbandry to trade negotiations. A tribe that could manage its sleep effectively could travel farther, fight harder, and survive longer than one that couldn't. This brings us to one of the most remarkable aspects of Mongol sleep culture, the role of dreams and their interpretation. In Mongol shamanic tradition, dreams weren't just random neural firings during REM sleep. They were messages from the spirit world, communications from ancestors, and glimpses into possible futures. The ability to remember, interpret, and act upon dreams was considered a valuable skill, one that could mean the difference between success and failure in both personal and military endeavors. Genghis Khan himself was said to be a powerful dreamer, receiving visions that guided his military campaigns and political decisions. Stories tell of him waking his generals in the middle of the night to share a dream that had revealed enemy movements or warned of impending danger. Whether these stories are literally true or not, they reflect the deep cultural importance that the Mongols placed on the messages that came during sleep. The shamans, the spiritual leaders of Mongol society, were particularly skilled at dream interpretation. They would often sleep in special positions or locations, seeking visions that could guide the tribe's decisions. Some would sleep outside the ger on particularly important nights, believing that direct contact with the earth and sky would enhance their ability to receive spiritual messages. This spiritual dimension of sleep extended to the entire community. Families would share their dreams around the morning fire, discussing their meanings and implications. Children were taught to pay attention to their dreams from an early age, learning to distinguish between ordinary dreams and those that might carry deeper significance. The practice of dream sharing also served practical purposes. In a nomadic society where information was crucial for survival, dreams often contained details about the landscape, weather patterns, or animal behavior that the dreamer's subconscious had noticed but their waking mind had missed. A dream about a particular valley might remind the tribe of a good grazing area, while a dream about wolves could prompt increased vigilance around the herds. As we delve deeper into the world of Mongol sleep, we begin to see that rest on the steppe was never just about closing your eyes and hoping for the best. It was a complex system of survival, spirituality, and social organization that helped create one of the most successful civilizations in human history. But what happened when the Mongols went to war? How do you get a good night's sleep when you're camped 50 miles from an enemy city, surrounded by the constant threat of ambush, sabotage, or full-scale attack? This is where Mongol sleep culture transformed from a survival strategy into a military weapon. The Mongol army didn't just march into battle. They carried their sleeping arrangements with them, creating mobile cities that could house tens of thousands of warriors, their families, and their animals. But these weren't the sprawling, vulnerable camps that other armies established. These were carefully organized communities designed to function efficiently, even in the middle of enemy territory. The key was organization. Every unit, from the smallest squad of 10 men to the largest division of 10,000, had its designated sleeping area within the camp. The arrangement wasn't random. It followed a precise pattern that reflected military hierarchy, tactical necessity, and the need for rapid mobilization. The Khan's GR occupied the center, surrounded by his personal guard and closest advisors. Radiating outward in concentric circles were the sleeping areas for different units, with the most experienced warriors closest to the center and newer recruits toward the perimeter. This layout served multiple purposes. It provided security through layered defense, ensured that orders could be transmitted quickly throughout the camp, and created a sense of unity and shared purpose that was crucial for maintaining morale during long campaigns. But perhaps most importantly, it meant that even in sleep, the army remained an army, ready to respond to threats or opportunities at a moment's notice. The concept of the night watch was elevated to an art form. Mongol sentries weren't just guards standing at the edge of camp, trying to stay awake until dawn. They were skilled warriors who understood that vigilance during the dark hours could mean the difference between victory and massacre. The watch rotated every few hours, ensuring that fresh eyes were always scanning the horizon while allowing everyone to get some rest. But here's what made the Mongol system so effective. The guards weren't just watching for enemies, they were listening to the horses. Mongol horses were so well trained and so attuned to their riders that they could detect approaching threats long before human senses could pick them up. A restless horse might indicate wolves in the area, but a truly agitated horse meant human danger. The Night Watch knew how to read these signals, using their animals as an early warning system that extended their sensory range far beyond what any human could achieve alone. Sleep during military campaigns also had to account for the practical realities of warfare. Armor couldn't just be removed and stored away. Weapons needed to be within arm's reach. Horses had to be ready for immediate mounting. This meant that even in sleep, Mongol warriors remained partially dressed and fully equipped. They developed techniques for sleeping in leather armor, methods for keeping weapons dry and accessible, and ways to rest while maintaining the ability to respond instantly to alarm calls. The truly elite warriors, the personal guards of the Khan and his generals, took this readiness to an extreme. They practiced what they called wolf sleep, a state of rest that was so light and alert that they could go from unconsciousness to full combat effectiveness in seconds. This wasn't just about military necessity. It was about honor, about proving that they were worthy of protecting the most important leaders in the empire. Weather added another layer of complexity to military sleep. A Mongol army might find itself camping in desert heat one week and mountain snow the next. They had to be prepared for sandstorms that could bury a gyr in minutes, rainstorms that could turn the ground into impassable mud, and temperature swings that could drop 40 degrees between sunset and sunrise. Their sleep systems had to be flexible enough to handle all of these conditions, while still providing the rest that soldiers needed to fight effectively. The solutions they developed were ingenious. Portable windbreaks that could be assembled quickly around sleeping areas. Waterproof covers that could be stretched over multiple gyrs to create shared shelters. Heating systems that used dried dung, wood, or even animal fat to provide warmth without creating visible smoke that might betray their position to enemies. Each innovation was tested in the field, refined through experience, and passed down through generations of warriors. Food and sleep were intimately connected in Mongol military culture. The evening meal wasn't just about nutrition, it was about creating the right conditions for rest. They understood that certain foods promoted sleep, while others caused restlessness. Mare's milk, fermented into the mildly alcoholic drink called airag, was often consumed before bed, not just for its nutritional value, but for its mild sedative effects. Dried meat provided protein that would sustain them through the night without causing digestive problems that might disrupt sleep. The timing of meals was also carefully considered. Eating too close to bedtime could cause discomfort, but going to sleep hungry was equally problematic. The Mongols developed a rhythm of small, frequent meals that kept their energy levels stable throughout the day and night, ensuring that hunger wouldn't wake them at crucial moments. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Mongol military sleep was how it maintained the spiritual and social dimensions that were so important in civilian life. Even in the middle of enemy territory, families slept together when possible. Dreams were still shared and interpreted. The shamans still performed their rituals and offered guidance based on visions received during sleep. This wasn't just about maintaining morale, though that was certainly important. It was about preserving the cultural identity that made the Mongols who they were. They understood that an army that lost its connection to its roots would eventually lose its strength. no matter how many battles it won. Sleep became a way of carrying home with them, wherever their campaigns might take them. The stories that emerge from these military sleeping arrangements are both fascinating and revealing. Tales of warriors who received prophetic dreams that saved their units from ambush. Accounts of shamans who used sleep rituals to divine the best times for attack. Reports of generals who made crucial strategic decisions based on insights that came to them during the quiet hours before dawn. One particularly famous story tells of a night during the siege of Kiev in 1240. The Mongol forces had surrounded the city, but the defenders were proving more resilient than expected. The siege had dragged on for weeks, and morale was beginning to suffer. Then, according to the chroniclers, a young warrior had a dream in which he saw a flock of ravens circling a specific section of the city wall. When he reported this dream to his commanders, they decided to concentrate their next assault on that exact location. The wall was breached within hours, and the city fell. Whether this story is literally true or not, it illustrates something important about Mongol military culture. Dreams weren't dismissed as meaningless fantasies. They were treated as potentially valuable intelligence, worthy of serious consideration and sometimes decisive action. This openness to information from unconventional sources was part of what made the Mongol military so adaptable and effective. The integration of sleep into military strategy extended beyond individual dreams and visions. The Mongols understood that the sleep patterns of their enemies could be exploited for tactical advantage. They studied the habits of the cities they besieged, learning when the guards were most likely to be drowsy, when the civilian population would be deeply asleep, and when their own forces would have the best chance of achieving surprise. Night attacks became a signature Mongol tactic, but they weren't random acts of violence. They were carefully planned operations that took advantage of the natural human tendency to be less alert during certain hours of the night. The Mongols knew that most people sleep most deeply in the hours just before dawn, and they used this knowledge to time their assaults for maximum psychological and tactical impact. But they also understood that their own forces needed to be prepared for these nighttime operations. This meant developing sleep schedules that ensured their warriors would be alert and ready during the crucial pre-dawn hours. It meant training soldiers to function effectively on limited sleep, and it meant creating systems that could maintain operational readiness even when individual warriors were exhausted. The logistics of managing sleep for an army of hundreds of thousands of people and animals were staggering. Consider the simple question of when to sleep. In a nomadic society, sleep schedules were flexible and responsive to immediate needs. But in a military campaign, coordination became crucial. If different units were operating on different sleep schedules, communication and coordination became nearly impossible. The Mongols solved this problem through a combination of discipline and flexibility. They established standard sleep periods that applied to the entire army, but they also built in exceptions for special circumstances. Scout units might operate on different schedules to maintain continuous reconnaissance. Guard units rotated their sleep periods to ensure constant vigilance. Specialized troops like engineers or siege operators might work through the night when their skills were needed, then sleep during the day when their services weren't required. This level of coordination required a sophisticated understanding of human physiology and psychology. The Mongol commanders had to know how much sleep different types of warriors needed to function effectively, how long they could operate on reduced rest, and what signs to watch for that indicated fatigue was becoming a problem. They developed techniques for assessing the sleep fitness of their troops, methods for adjusting schedules based on changing conditions, and strategies for maintaining effectiveness, even when ideal rest wasn't possible. The relationship between sleep and leadership was particularly complex in Mongol military culture. Commanders were expected to share the hardships of their men, which meant sleeping in the same conditions and facing the same challenges. But they also had to remain alert and available for decision-making at all hours. This created a tension between the need for rest and the demands of leadership that required careful management, many Mongol leaders developed what could be called tactical sleeping, the ability to take short, restorative naps at strategic moments while maintaining overall awareness of their surroundings. This wasn't the deep, vulnerable sleep that civilians enjoyed in their gers. It was a lighter, more strategic form of rest that allowed them to recharge while remaining ready to respond to urgent situations. The great Khan Genghis himself was legendary for his ability to function on minimal sleep during campaigns. Stories tell of him reviewing battle plans by firelight long after his generals had retired, then rising before dawn to inspect the horses and speak with the night watch. Yet those who served under him reported that he never seemed tired, never appeared to lose his edge or his judgment due to lack of rest. This wasn't superhuman endurance. It was the product of a lifetime spent learning how to use sleep as a tool, rather than simply surrendering to it as a necessity. The techniques that Mongol leaders used to manage their sleep were passed down through generations of military families. They learned to take advantage of natural lulls in activity, grabbing 20 or 30 minutes of rest during the heat of the day when travel was difficult, or during the preparation phases before major engagements when their immediate presence wasn't required. They developed an internal clock that could wake them at predetermined times without any external alarm, a skill that was crucial when surprise attacks or early morning movements were planned. But leadership sleep wasn't just about the commanders themselves. It was about understanding the sleep needs of the entire army and managing those needs as a strategic resource. A tired army was a vulnerable army, prone to mistakes, slow to respond, and liable to break under pressure. The Mongols understood that victory often went to the force that could maintain its effectiveness longest, and that meant treating sleep as seriously as they treated weapons, horses, or food supplies. The seasonal aspects of military sleep added another layer of complexity. Summer campaigns presented different challenges than winter ones. During the long days of summer, when darkness lasted only a few hours, the army had to adapt its sleep patterns to take advantage of whatever rest was available. Warriors learned to sleep during the hottest part of the day, when travel was uncomfortable and enemies were likely to be seeking shade themselves. Winter campaigns brought the opposite challenge. Long nights meant more opportunity for rest, but also more opportunity for enemy movement under cover of darkness. The cold made sleep both more necessary and more difficult to achieve. Mongol forces developed winter sleeping techniques that conserved body heat while maintaining readiness, using shared body warmth, specialized cold weather gear, and carefully managed heating systems that provided warmth without creating vulnerabilities. The psychological aspects of sleep in military settings were just as important as the physical ones. Fear, excitement, and anticipation could all interfere with rest, even when warriors were exhausted. The Mongols developed mental techniques for managing these emotions, methods for calming the mind and preparing it for restorative sleep, even in the most stressful circumstances. These techniques drew heavily on their shamanic traditions. Breathing exercises that slowed the heart rate and quieted racing thoughts. Visualization practices that helped warriors mentally rehearse successful outcomes for upcoming battles. Meditation techniques that allowed them to find inner calm even when surrounded by the chaos of military life. These weren't just spiritual practices, they were practical tools for maintaining mental and physical readiness. The role of music and storytelling in military sleep culture was particularly fascinating. Mongol warriors often fell asleep to the sound of traditional songs, epic poems, or stories told around the evening fires. These weren't just entertainment. They were psychological preparation, mental conditioning that reinforced cultural values and military ideals, even during rest. The rhythmic nature of traditional Mongol poetry and song also had a naturally soporific effect, helping warriors transition from the alertness of military life to the relaxation necessary for restorative sleep. The stories told during these evening gatherings served multiple purposes. They preserved cultural memory, passing down the history and values of the Mongol people to younger generations. They provided moral instruction, illustrating the consequences of different choices and behaviors. And they offered psychological comfort, connecting individual warriors to the larger narrative of their people's greatness and destiny. But perhaps most importantly, these stories helped warriors process their experiences. The life of a Mongol soldier was filled with violence, hardship, and moral complexity. The traditional tales provided frameworks for understanding these experiences, ways of making sense of the chaos and brutality of military life. They offered models of heroic behavior, examples of how to maintain honor and dignity even in the most challenging circumstances. The evening storytelling sessions also served as informal intelligence gathering. Warriors would share observations from their travels, reports from scouts, and rumors picked up from captured enemies or local populations. This information was woven into the stories and songs, creating a distributed intelligence network that helped keep the entire army informed about changing conditions and emerging threats. Dreams and their interpretation took on even greater significance in military settings. The high-stress environment of military campaigns often produced vivid, memorable dreams that seemed to offer guidance or warnings. The army's shamans were skilled at interpreting these dreams, helping commanders understand their potential significance and decide whether to act on the insights they provided. Some of the most famous decisions in Mongol military history were reportedly based on dreams received during sleep. The timing of attacks, the selection of routes, the identification of traitors, all of these crucial choices were sometimes influenced by visions that came during the night hours. Whether these dreams were truly prophetic or simply the subconscious mind processing information that hadn't been consciously recognized, they played a real role in Mongol military decision-making. The medical aspects of military sleep were also highly developed. Mongol army physicians understood that sleep deprivation could be as dangerous as battle wounds, weakening the immune system, impairing judgment, and reducing physical capabilities. They developed treatments for sleep disorders, techniques for helping traumatized warriors find rest, and methods for assessing when individual soldiers were too exhausted to be effective. These medical practitioners also understood the relationship between sleep and healing. Wounded warriors were given priority access to the most comfortable sleeping areas, understanding that good rest would speed their recovery and get them back into action more quickly. They developed specialized bedding and sleeping positions for different types of injuries, ensuring that healing wasn't interfered with by uncomfortable or inappropriate rest positions. The integration of animals into military sleep arrangements was another unique aspect of Mongol warfare. The bond between Mongol warriors and their horses was legendary, and this relationship extended into their sleeping arrangements. Warriors often slept near their mounts, not just for security, but for the psychological comfort that came from being close to their most trusted companions. The horses themselves were integrated into the army's sleep security system. Mongol horses were trained to remain calm and quiet during rest periods, but to alert their riders to any unusual sounds or movements. This created a network of early warning systems that extended far beyond what human sentries could provide alone. The horses' superior hearing and scent detection capabilities made them invaluable partners in maintaining security during the vulnerable hours of sleep. The seasonal migration patterns of the Mongol armies were also influenced by sleep considerations. The timing of major campaigns was often planned to take advantage of optimal sleeping conditions, avoiding the most extreme weather and taking advantage of natural shelters and favorable terrain. The great campaigns of conquest weren't just about military strategy and political opportunity. They were about finding the right balance between aggressive action and the practical necessities of keeping a massive army healthy and effective. The cultural exchange that occurred during these campaigns also affected Mongol sleep practices. As they conquered new territories and absorbed new populations, they encountered different sleeping traditions and techniques. Some of these innovations were adopted and integrated into their own practices, while others were rejected as incompatible with their nomadic lifestyle and military needs. The influence of Chinese sleeping practices, for example, can be seen in some of the more elaborate sleeping arrangements used by Mongol nobility during the later periods of the empire. Persian and Islamic influences affected their understanding of dreams and their interpretation. European practices influenced their siege warfare and the sleeping arrangements used during extended military operations. But throughout all of these cultural exchanges, the core principles of Mongol sleep culture remained constant: flexibility, adaptability, and the understanding that rest was a tool to be used strategically, rather than a luxury to be enjoyed passively. These principles served them well, whether they were sleeping in the familiar felt of their ancestral jurs or in the captured palaces of conquered cities. The legacy of Mongol sleep practices extended far beyond the empire itself. The techniques they developed for managing rest in challenging conditions influenced military practices across Asia and Europe. Their understanding of the relationship between sleep and performance contributed to advances in military medicine and logistics. Their integration of spiritual and practical approaches to rest provided models that were adopted by other nomadic peoples and military organizations. The merchant networks that grew up around the Mongol Empire also spread these sleep practices to civilian populations. Traders traveling the Silk Road adopted Mongol techniques for sleeping in caravans, managing rest during long journeys, and maintaining alertness in dangerous territory. These practices were then carried to trading centers across the known world, influencing sleep cultures from Venice to Beijing. As we delve deeper into the intimate details of how the Mongols managed their rest, we begin to see that their approach to sleep was far more sophisticated than simple exhaustion and collapse. It was a carefully crafted system that balanced individual needs with collective security, spiritual beliefs with practical necessities, and traditional practices with innovative adaptations to new challenges. The question of privacy during sleep, or rather the lack thereof, reveals something profound about Mongol social organization. In a culture where individual identity was so closely tied to group membership, the absence of private sleeping spaces wasn't seen as a loss of personal freedom. It was understood as a necessary part of maintaining the social bonds that made survival possible in a harsh and unpredictable world. This communal approach to rest extended beyond immediate family groups to include the broader military and social units that made up Mongol society. Warriors who fought together also slept together, creating bonds of trust and mutual dependence that were crucial for military effectiveness. The shared vulnerability of sleep became a source of strength rather than weakness, binding individuals together in ways that couldn't be achieved through formal oaths or military discipline alone. The sounds of the sleeping camp tell their own story. The gentle snoring of exhausted warriors, the shifting and rustling of people adjusting their positions during the night, the occasional cry of a dreaming soldier, the soft nickering of horses, the crackling of dying fires. These weren't disturbances to be eliminated. They were the soundtrack of a living community, the audio confirmation that the group was intact, safe, and functioning as it should. The Mongols developed an almost supernatural ability to read these nighttime sounds. Experienced warriors could tell the difference between the restless movement of someone having a nightmare and the subtle shifting that indicated a person was waking up naturally. They could distinguish between the normal sounds of sleeping horses and the alertness that suggested potential danger nearby. This acoustic awareness became part of their survival toolkit, a skill passed down from older warriors to younger ones through years of shared sleeping experiences. But it wasn't just about detecting threats. The sounds of the camp also provided comfort and reassurance. The rhythmic breathing of sleeping companions, the familiar creaking of leather, and felt as people moved in their sleep. Even the occasional sleep talking in the various languages spoken throughout the empire. These sounds created a sense of home and belonging that could be recreated anywhere, whether they were camped in the familiar grasslands of Mongolia or in the foreign territories they had conquered. The relationship between sleep and memory was particularly important in Mongol culture. Without written records for most of their history, the Mongols relied heavily on oral tradition to preserve their laws, stories, and cultural practices. Sleep played a crucial role in this process. The quiet hours before dawn were often used for reciting genealogies, reviewing legal precedents, and rehearsing the epic poems that contained their collective memory. Young warriors would lie in their bedrolls, listening to the elders recite the great stories of their ancestors. These weren't just entertainment or education. They were active memory exercises, ways of ensuring that crucial cultural information was preserved and transmitted, even in the mobile, chaotic environment of military campaigns. The rhythm of the recitations, the repetitive nature of the oral formulas, and the quiet darkness of the pre-dawn hours all combined to create optimal conditions for memorization. The shamans took this practice even further, using specialized sleep techniques to enhance their ability to remember and transmit spiritual knowledge. They would often sleep in specific positions, use particular breathing patterns, or consume certain herbs before rest to promote the kind of deep, dream-rich sleep that they believed enhanced their connection to the spirit world and their ability to receive and remember divine messages. This integration of sleep and memory had practical military applications as well. Scouts and spies were trained to use their sleeping hours to process and organize the information they had gathered during the day. They learned techniques for reviewing their observations during the transitional periods between waking and sleeping, when the mind was most receptive to making connections and identifying patterns that might not have been obvious during active reconnaissance. The seasonal rhythms of Mongol sleep were closely tied to their understanding of natural cycles and their relationship with the land. During the spring migrations, when the herds were moving to fresh pastures and the weather was unpredictable, sleep patterns were adapted to take advantage of favorable conditions whenever they occurred. Warriors might sleep during fierce storms when travel was impossible, then remain awake and active during clear weather that was too valuable to waste. Summer brought its own challenges and opportunities. The long days of the northern steppe meant that traditional sleep schedules had to be completely reimagined. The Mongols developed techniques for sleeping during the brightest part of the day, using portable shelters and eye coverings to create artificial darkness. They learned to work with their natural circadian rhythms, taking advantage of the natural dip in alertness that occurs in mid-afternoon, even when the sun is still high. The autumn months were perhaps the most crucial for sleep management. This was the time when the herds were at their fattest, when the weather was most favorable for long-distance travel, and when the most important military campaigns were typically launched. The Mongols understood that the quality of rest they achieved during this period would determine their effectiveness throughout the coming winter, so they developed specialized techniques for maximizing the restorative power of their sleep. Winter sleep was an art form in itself. The long nights of the northern latitudes provided extended opportunities for rest, but the extreme cold made achieving comfortable sleep a significant challenge. The Mongols developed elaborate systems for managing body heat during sleep, using shared warmth, specialized clothing, and carefully designed sleeping arrangements that maximized efficiency while minimizing risk. The concept of sleep debt was well understood in Mongol culture. Though they didn't use that modern terminology, they recognized that periods of reduced sleep had to be balanced with periods of extended rest, and they built this understanding into their planning for both military campaigns and seasonal migrations. A successful campaign required not just adequate supplies and good weather, but also a realistic assessment of how much sleep the army would need to maintain effectiveness over extended periods. The psychological aspects of sleep in such a communal environment were complex and fascinating. The Mongols had to develop techniques for maintaining individual mental health while living in conditions that provided almost no privacy or personal space. Sleep became one of the few times when individuals could retreat into their own thoughts and experiences, even while surrounded by others. Dreams served as a kind of private mental space where individuals could process their experiences without the social pressures and expectations that governed waking life. The Mongol understanding of dreams as meaningful communications from the spirit world provided a framework for treating these private mental experiences as valuable and worthy of attention, even in a culture that placed primary emphasis on collective identity and group loyalty. The role of women in Mongol sleep culture was particularly important and often overlooked in historical accounts that focus primarily on military activities. Mongol women were responsible for managing the domestic aspects of sleep, from maintaining the sleeping areas within the jers to ensuring that bedding was clean, dry, and properly arranged. But their role went far beyond simple housekeeping. Women were often the primary interpreters of dreams, especially those related to family matters, childbirth, and domestic concerns. They maintained the oral traditions related to sleep rituals and practices, passing down knowledge about herbs that promoted rest, techniques for helping sick family members sleep comfortably, and methods for creating the optimal sleeping environment under various conditions. The elderly held special positions in Mongol sleep culture, both because of their accumulated wisdom and because of their changing sleep needs. Older warriors and family members were given priority access to the warmest, most comfortable sleeping areas, but they also served as guardians of sleep-related knowledge and traditions. Their lighter sleep patterns, common in older adults, were seen as an advantage rather than a problem, as they could serve as informal sentries during the night hours. The treatment of sleep disorders and sleep-related problems was surprisingly sophisticated in Mongol medicine. They recognized conditions that we would now classify as insomnia, sleep apnea, and various forms of parasomnia. Their treatments combine practical approaches, like adjusting sleeping positions and environmental conditions, with spiritual interventions, like specific rituals and herbal preparations. The integration of captured peoples and foreign warriors into Mongol sleep culture was a crucial aspect of their military success. New recruits had to be taught not just fighting techniques and military discipline, but also the sleep practices that would allow them to function effectively as part of a Mongol army. This cultural education was seen as just as important as weapons training in creating effective warriors. The Mongols were remarkably adaptable in this regard, incorporating useful sleeping practices from conquered peoples while maintaining their core cultural values. Chinese silk sleeping materials, Persian carpet techniques, and European military camp organization all found their way into Mongol practice, but always within the framework of their traditional nomadic lifestyle and military needs. The relationship between sleep and leadership succession was another important aspect of Mongol culture. The ability to function effectively on limited sleep, to make good decisions during the vulnerable hours of night, and to maintain awareness and control even while resting were all seen as important leadership qualities. Young nobles and potential military commanders were specifically trained in these skills as part of their preparation for positions of responsibility. The great Khans and their immediate families had access to more luxurious sleeping arrangements than ordinary warriors, but they were expected to maintain the same basic practices and disciplines. A leader who became too attached to comfort, who couldn't sleep in the field with his troops, or who lost the ability to function effectively under challenging conditions, would quickly lose the respect and loyalty of his followers. The economic aspects of sleep in Mongol society were also significant. The materials used for bedding, the time and labor required to maintain sleeping areas, and the opportunity costs of extended rest periods all had to be carefully managed. The Mongols developed efficient systems for producing, maintaining, and transporting sleeping materials, understanding that the quality of rest directly affected the productivity and effectiveness of their entire society. Trade in sleep-related goods became an important part of the broader Mongol economic system. Specialized furs, high-quality felt, silk fabrics, and various medicinal herbs were all valued commodities that moved along the trade routes that connected the Mongol Empire. The standardization of sleeping practices across the empire created markets for these goods and helped establish the economic networks that supported Mongol expansion and administration. The architectural innovations that emerged from Mongol sleep culture had lasting impacts on building design across much of Asia and Eastern Europe. The principles of efficient space utilization, flexible room arrangements, and climate control that were developed for years influenced the design of permanent structures in many of the territories that came under Mongol control. The psychological resilience that Mongols developed through their sleep practices was one of their great advantages over their enemies. The ability to find rest and maintain mental balance under the most challenging conditions gave them a significant edge in prolonged conflicts. While their enemies struggled with fatigue, homesickness, and the psychological toll of extended campaigns, Mongol warriors could maintain their effectiveness indefinitely because they carried their sleeping culture with them wherever they went. The spiritual dimensions of Mongol sleep culture provided a framework for understanding and coping with the violence and uncertainty of their lifestyle. The belief that dreams could provide guidance, that sleep was a time of communication with ancestors and spirits, and that rest was a sacred activity that connected them to the natural world, all helped create psychological resilience and cultural continuity. As we examine these intimate details of Mongol sleep culture, we begin to understand how a relatively small population of nomadic herders was able to create and maintain the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Their success wasn't just due to superior military tactics or political organization. It was built on a foundation of practical wisdom about human nature, social organization, and the fundamental requirements for survival and success in a challenging world. The legacy of Mongol sleep practices can still be seen today in the traditional cultures of Central Asia, where many of the techniques and beliefs they developed continue to influence how people think about rest, dreams, and the relationship between individual and community needs. The jar itself remains a popular and practical housing solution in Mongolia and other parts of Central Asia, testament to the enduring value of the design principles that the Mongols developed centuries ago. But perhaps the most important lesson from Mongol sleep culture is the understanding that rest is not a luxury or a weakness, but a strategic necessity that must be carefully managed and skillfully employed. In our modern world, where sleep is often seen as time stolen from productivity, the Mongol approach offers a different perspective. They understood that the quality of rest directly affects the quality of everything else, from military effectiveness to spiritual insight to social harmony. The Mongols didn't just sleep well because they were tired from riding horses and fighting battles. They slept well because they had developed a sophisticated understanding of how to create the conditions for restorative rest under any circumstances. They had learned to work with natural rhythms rather than against them, to use sleep as a tool for building social bonds and maintaining cultural identity, and to find meaning and guidance in the quiet hours when the conscious mind surrendered to deeper sources of wisdom. Their sleeping practices were inseparable from their success as conquerors, administrators, and cultural innovators. The same flexibility and adaptability that allowed them to sleep comfortably in a felt tent on the frozen steppe also allowed them to govern a vast empire that stretched from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. The same communal values that governed their sleeping arrangements also created the loyalty and cooperation that held their military forces together across decades of continuous campaigning. The same spiritual beliefs that gave meaning to their dreams also provided the cultural framework that allowed them to integrate conquered peoples and maintain their identity across enormous distances and cultural differences. In the end, the way the Mongols slept was not just a practical necessity. It was a reflection of their entire worldview, their understanding of human nature, and their approach to the challenges of survival and success in an unpredictable world. As the great campaigns wound down and the Mongol Empire reached its zenith, the sleeping practices that had carried armies across continents began to evolve into something even more remarkable. The descendants of those fierce warriors who had once slept with weapons at their sides now found themselves ruling from palaces in Beijing, Baghdad, and Kiev. But even in these grand capitals, the fundamental principles of Mongol sleep culture endured, adapted to new circumstances, but never abandoned. The transformation wasn't sudden. It happened gradually, as generations of Mongol rulers discovered that the flexibility and wisdom of their ancestors' sleeping practices could be just as valuable in governing an empire as they had been in conquering one. The communal sleeping arrangements that had once bound warriors together now created networks of loyalty and information that spanned continents. The dream interpretation traditions that had guided military decisions now influenced diplomatic negotiations and administrative policies. What emerges from this long journey through Mongol sleep culture is something profound about human nature itself. The Mongols understood that rest wasn't separate from the rest of life. It was woven into everything they did. From the most mundane daily tasks to the most momentous historical events. Their sleeping practices weren't just about getting enough sleep. They were about creating a way of life that could endure anything, adapt to any challenge, and find meaning in any circumstance. In our modern world, where sleep is often treated as an inconvenience or a luxury, the Mongol approach offers a different vision. They saw rest as a source of strength, dreams as a form of wisdom, and the quiet hours of night as opportunities for the kind of deep reflection and spiritual connection that daylight rarely allows. They understood that the quality of sleep directly influenced the quality of everything else, from personal relationships to military effectiveness to spiritual insight. The felt tents are mostly gone now, replaced by permanent structures and modern conveniences. The great herds no longer migrate across the steppes in their ancient patterns. The shamans no longer interpret dreams for Khans planning their next conquest. But the essential wisdom remains, waiting in the darkness for those who understand that true rest is not about escaping from life, but about finding the strength to embrace it fully. Tonight, as you prepare for your own rest, perhaps you can carry with you a small piece of that ancient wisdom, not the harsh realities of sleeping in a freezing tent with a dozen other warriors, but the deeper understanding that sleep is a gift, a tool, and a bridge between the world we know and the mysteries we're still discovering. The Mongols knew that every night was a journey, every dream a message, and every morning a chance to begin again. In the end, that might be the most important lesson from the steppes. Not how to sleep like a Mongol warrior, but how to rest like someone who understands that tomorrow's battles, whatever they might be, will be won or lost by the quality of tonight's dreams. Sleep well, and may your own journeys be filled with the kind of rest that transforms ordinary nights into extraordinary possibilities.